Hello, welcome to Dot Point PS3, the taste test. So there's two worksheets for this Dot Point. There's PS3 taste test, this one, and PS3, PS14 as well. But this one is assessing farm production systems based on measurements of quantity and quality. And we're doing a taste test of different cuts of beef to work out how good they are. So let's have a look at what we did for the taste test. So basically, you need to understand about MSA here. So MSA is Meat Standards Australia, which is a system that was developed by MLA, which is Meat and Livestock Australia, who are responsible for research and marketing of beef and other red meats. But Meat Standards Australia is a system which you see this kind of thing in Woolies, for example. They have a whole section where they just sell MSA beef, and this is beef that's been produced in a certain way, according to certain standards. Then it's been checked at the abattoir, the carcass has been measured, and then they grade it according to certain MSA standards. And then they inform consumers on how to cook it. Because the problem with beef, as it says here, why do we need MSA? Basically, beef consumption has declined in Australia in the past 40 years for a number of reasons, but health concerns are one. Also the cheaper prices of other meats, and also beef is seen as less consistent in terms of eating quality. You might buy a really expensive piece of beef, but if you don't cook it very well, then it might not turn out very well, which doesn't tend to happen with other things, other meats. So we'll look at that later, and that actually happened in our taste test. So for this reason, they needed a system to kind of improve the reputation of beef and improve the quality of beef that consumers were getting and make it more consistent. And so they needed to connect to like palatability, or what consumers like about the taste. And palatability up here includes tenderness, juiciness, flavor, and overall liking. They needed to connect the palatability with what was happening on the farm. And so they needed to actually be able to work out what do consumers like, and then how do we produce that thing so that every time that they get a piece of beef, they get something that they like. The other part of MSA is actually educating the consumer and making them know how to cook it, because if you could get a really good piece of beef and cook it badly, and that will make it a really bad quality piece of beef when they eat it, even though it started off as a very good quality piece of beef. It can be wrecked by the consumer. So how does MSA work? Basically, they're grading beef. You should really watch these two videos. You really can't do this without watching these two videos. You won't understand it. You won't be able to do very well. So watch these two videos. They're both very short. They both talk about MSA. And so producers really need to follow, in terms of how MSA works on farm, producers are following certain steps to ensure that the meat is good eating quality. It includes things like handling, chemical use, and growth rates to improve the quality of the beef. And then how's it graded at the abattoir? Basically, it's graded on a 3, 4, or 5 scale. And I've got this example here. This is the scale here that it's graded on, and it's either 3, 4, or 5 star on the MSA scale. So this down here is a fail. 46 to 64 is a 3, so kind of okay. 4 is really good, and then 5 is very good quality beef if it meets the right specifications. When it's graded, and it's graded at the abattoir, and the carcass is measured. This is an important bit about MSA. So in terms of our beef taste test, here's how we did it. The control, you're comparing against basically your previous experience of beef, or I guess the first cut that you have. So the first piece that you try, that will be your kind of baseline or control, and then everything you have after that, you'll kind of compare against that. How have we standardized? We've had everything the same size, same cooking time. You could also see in here that you're blindfolded, so you can't really tell the difference between the cuts, other than the taste and the palatability. Replication, you're given multiple rounds or multiple lots of each cut to try. Randomization, the cuts were given in a random order, and you're blindfolded. Independent variable, which is the thing that you change, was the beef cut, and the dependent variable, the thing that you measure in this case, was the rating, or you could also write here the palatability. So these are just the general rankings. So these were the cuts that I did for my class: diced beef, chuck, New York, and then rump. And basically it was measured in this order. Now you'll notice here that 1 and 2 were like the cheaper cuts, and 3 was the most expensive one. So it's interesting to note that almost everyone got the same order, by the way, in the class, but it's interesting to note that the cheaper cuts were actually ended up being better in people's opinions than the more expensive one. And the reason for this could be because we cut them all up in the same size and cooked them for the same amount of time. And generally, cuts that are more expensive and are better quality normally, such as the New York steak, need to be cooked for a shorter period of time, and because they don't have as much fat, and they're much more tender. And if you cook them for too long, they will get tough. Whereas these other ones need cooking for a bit longer. So because we did all cook them at the same time, that could be the reason why our more expensive cut was actually considered to be worse than the cheaper cuts, such as a $20, and even a $14 cut was better than a $22 cut. So you can see from this experiment the difference in quality that comes from cooking. So you could cook a really great piece of steak badly, and that will wreck the quality of it. Whereas you could cook a really poor quality piece, such as chuck, cheap, very poor quality normally. You could cook it really well, and it ends up being really palatable, and consumers really like it. So educating consumers about how to cook different pieces of beef is really important. And basically that's why it's part of MSA, Meat Standards Australia, is informing consumers at the point of sale. So on the beef packet, it'll say you need to cook it in this way for this long, and it'll tell people how to cook it right. Otherwise, it will stuff up the quality. So these were kind of the overall rankings. And basically the conclusion here was the higher price cuts might theoretically be better quality. However, since we cut them and cooked them all evenly, the cheaper cuts may have ended up tasting better.